right, good evening. Let's see here. Announcements. Okay. That'll work. Any others? Sunday school meeting next Sunday is our plan. I put tentatively because it depends on if our Sunday school teachers are able to be here or not. We'll go from there. But we are planning to have the Sunday school meeting next Sunday. Let's see, and then CPR class is rescheduled, and benevolence offering next Sunday. I think that's it. Do we have any prayer requests tonight? All right, then let's go to the Lord in prayer. Miss Eleanor, would you lead us in prayer, please? Amen. Okie doke. The local church. We talked about the historical sketch. We talked about articles of religion. And then now let's look at the individual parts of it. Tonight we're going to talk about the local church. What is the local church? Us, yes, but let's be more specific. According to the discipline, the local church is a Christian society. A Christian church is a society of believers in Jesus Christ and is of divine institution. That's directly from the discipline. And so it's the first statement that it makes then is that it's a group of people that come together, us, that believe in Jesus Christ, and that consists of enough members to fill the roles of the church, to meet the organizational standards, and also that they agreed to abide by the Methodist Protestant Book of Discipline and believe the Articles of Religion. We talked about the Articles of Religion last week, and now we're talking about the Book of Discipline, the parts that we're going through here now. So how do I become a member of the local church? What's required to be a member of the local church? The first thing is salvation. Salvation is the basic requirement. That's the fundamental, foundational requirement to membership. If you're not saved, then you can't be a member, right? The second thing then is to make an application. We had this long, detailed application that you have to fill out in order to be a member, right? Nah, just come see me. Got ahead of myself. Salvation, I qualify or define salvation as when a person experiences a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So application is made to the pastor. What if a pastor is not available? The church board, start with the church leader. The church officials, but you go church leader and then down from there. We'll talk more about some of those roles in just a minute. The applicant will then go through a ceremony, a ritual ceremony, and and when I use the word ritual here, I don't use it in the sense that we tend to think of it. Usually when we think of ritual, we just think of something that you do over and over and over again. But a ritual is also a plan or a program that is followed. And we do have a ritual for accepting members into the church. There are specific questions that are asked and answered during that ritual or during that service. And those are things that that I would go over with the applicant beforehand and ask them these questions to ensure that they agree with that, because I don't want them to get up here and then, oh, wait, I can't do that. I don't agree with that. That wouldn't be too good, would it? And so we go through all of that beforehand and make sure that that they do understand what it means to be a member of the church. There's another part to it as well I don't have on here, and it's actually going to be mentioned a little bit later on as well. But each member, each person, when they become a member of the church, is given something. What are they given? Well, I'll give them that. Yeah. What else? A discipline. Right. We'll give them a discipline. And what's the purpose of giving them the discipline? So they know how the church operates, know the function of the church, know they're agreeing that they are going to abide by the book of discipline and by the articles of religion. Well, they need to have that in order to be able to abide by it, right? Whose responsibility is it to get that to them? I'll answer that question in just a few minutes. It may or may not be what you think it is. Can a member be removed from the church roll according to the discipline? If the conditions are right, what would those conditions be? Okay, blatant sin against God. That comes under the judiciary section. And yes, a person can be removed for that. What else? If they've joined another church, I'll talk about that in a minute. What else? If they don't follow the discipline of the church. If they have not attended or supported the church for a period of 2 years. Now, there's some things that are to take place during that time. The pastor is to contact them. The church board is to contact them during that 2-year period. And if they do not respond or their response is not acceptable, then by a vote of the church, their name can be removed from the roll. Yes. And the intent is not to just take somebody off the church roll, but to keep the church roll updated and active is the intent here. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've done it. I think we've done it 3 times since I've been here. So 3 times in 3.5 years. Can a person be a member of 2 churches? That was already mentioned, and the answer to that is no. If a person joins another church, whether it's the same denomination or another denomination, it doesn't matter, then their membership at Forest Grove would be terminated based on the discipline. Mm-hmm. We do. We do. Not all churches will give us one. If somebody's coming to us from another church, especially from another denomination, they won't always give us one. We have gotten some we haven't. That's one of them. But if I get a request and the person is a member in good standing, then I will send a letter to that church regardless. Okay, so what are the offices of the local church? So let's get these one at a time. We'll go through them here. How does the church get a pastor? No. Now let's stay with the normal circumstances first. So in a normal situation, we elect a delegate. Now, I think our election is coming up in March. We'll elect a delegate. When that delegate then goes to conference, they go to represent the church. Now, let's say, an example here. Let's say that this year we agree that I'm not going to be coming back next year. So the delegate will know that ahead of time. I'll let the conference know. He'll let the conference know, or she, whomever that is. And when we go to conference then, we have a committee that is elected by the annual conference. It is a standing committee, and the title of that committee is the stationing committee. It consists of 2 ministers and 2 laymen and the president of the conference. They will meet with the pastor, they'll meet with the delegates. And in a situation where both agree that the pastor is not going to come back for whatever reason, then the stationing committee will look at the pool of whom is available. Right now it's a pretty small pool. A very shallow pool, let's put it that way. Anyway, so then the stationing committee would meet with the delegate and say, okay, here are some possibilities that we have. And the delegate would look at those, and in many cases, the delegate will contact other members of the church and ask, what about this person? What do you think? What's your opinion? Prayer is certainly going to be involved in that the Lord will lead the right person and the right one will be selected. And so at the stationing committee then, an agreement is made between the delegate, the stationing committee, and the new pastor, and they come to that agreement and come. For example, back, 40 years ago, in fact, at conference that year, who was the delegate? The delegate. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Perry was. I think Mr. Perry Ballard was the delegate that year. Anyway, there was some back and forth with the stationing committee on who to assign to Forest Grove. I had been assigned to Castle Chapel. I'd already met with the stationing committee, and that was determined. And then about 10 o'clock, I think it was, on Friday night. You think we have late conferences now? About 10 o'clock on Friday night, they called me back into the stationing committee and said, we're going to make a change. you're not going to go to Castle Chapel, you're going to go to Forest Grove instead. And it was one of those last-minute changes. But those are things, but that's what the stationing committee does. That's the role that they have. Now, I mentioned that it's a standing committee. So let's go to the other scenario that you mentioned. Let's say that in the case where the pastor leaves in the middle of the year. Who fills in, first of all, when the pastor's not here? That's the role of the church leader. So what do we do? What would you do then if for some reason the pastor had to leave in the middle of the year? Who would you call? President of the conference. And hopefully the outgoing pastor will have done so as well. And then the president of the conference would look to see who is available that they could send, at least on a temporary basis, until a permanent pastor could be arranged for the church. And it may be that somebody's done as an interim until someone can be found for the church. The stationing committee, I mentioned earlier, is a standing committee. And so the president of the conference can call the stationing committee during the year to meet and to work through that as well. Or the president also has the authority to assign a pastor to the church during the year. But that's just some of the things, the way that would work. I'm not going to go through all of the details of what the pastor is supposed to do, just highlight a couple of them. The first and the most important, and I am going to read this one directly from the discipline, and then I'll kind of explain what it says. To preach the word, administer the ordinances, execute the discipline, and faithfully discharge all the duties belonging to the ministerial and pastoral office, and to read and explain such portions of the Constitution and discipline as he may deem necessary to give our people suitable information in regard to our ecclesiastical economy. What in the world does that mean? It did sound important, didn't it? It's exactly what we're doing. It's one of the duties of the pastor, not just to carry out the normal duties of the pastor, but one of the duties is to make sure that that his members know and understand the discipline. And so that's why we're doing this, is to make sure that we have a better understanding of what the discipline says about different things. The pastor receives members and probationers. You ever heard that term, probationer? What is a probationer? I don't know, I just heard the term. Well, yes, but not in this case. Young children are probationary members. The children of members. Well, that they are probationers. That's the term that's given to them, is probationers. That perspective would be another term for it, yes. And one of the responsibilities of the church that, well, to be honest, I guess we really have not done a very good job of this, and it's something we need to get back to, but one of the responsibilities of the church is to teach the probationary or probationers what it means to be a member of the church, so that when they're old enough and they're and they're qualified, that is, they have a relationship with Jesus Christ and they make an application, then they can become members of the church. What age can a person be a member of the church? As long as they're old enough to understand what it means and make that membership. What age does a person have to be a committee member or to be on a member of one of the committees that we have, or be a church officer? $18, and that is in the discipline. Announce the time of the next official board meeting, general care of the church and its membership. Those are just some of the highlights. There's about 2.5 pages that go into it, and for sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of that. Next is the church leader. How do we select a church leader? By vote. They're elected by the church. General responsibilities include supporting the pastor in carrying out the work of the church, and in the absence of a pastor, providing spiritual leadership to the church. Trustees. What? By election. What's the responsibilities of the trustees? Maintenance and upkeep of the church. They're responsible to oversee the maintenance and upkeep of the church. I think it's important that we understand that, because what tends to happen sometimes is, oh, that's the responsibility of the trustee. I don't have anything to do with that. That's not right. If you are a member of the church, it is your responsibility to help maintain and keep the property looking good. It's the trustee's responsibility to oversee that and make sure that it happens. But all members have a responsibility in maintenance and upkeep of the church. I think it's important that we remember that. What else are the trustees? What's another responsibility or duty that the trustees have? Well, that cabinet's looking really good back there. That's more than just maintenance and upkeep. They're responsible for additions, for when we added the vestibule out front, whose responsibility was that? Who made the initial decision and plan? Now, they weren't the ones that made the final decision. Who makes the final decision on anything like that? The church does. The church membership does. But the trustees look at it and they determine the feasibility. They determine what works, what doesn't, and then they make the recommendation now to the church board. The church board, depending on what it is, may bring that to the full church, especially if it's something that's going to be a large expense. Then that would come to the full church for approval. If that's to happen, what's the process? How would that be done? Let's say that the trustees decide that we're going to build a new building. It's going to cost $150,000 to do that. Trustees don't have the authority to make that final decision, but they've determined the need, they've determined the feasibility, and so they take that to the church board. Church board looks at it, church board evaluates it, and the church board votes to continue with this process. But because of the amount, because of the size of all the involvement, it's determined that needs to go to the full church for a decision. How is that accomplished? Mm-hmm. Okay? But how will they do that? What are the details of how they will go about doing that? It must be announced 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks prior to the time of the vote from the pulpit. That's straight out of the discipline. What's the reason for that?
So that if anybody that's wanting to know can find out more about what's going on, so there will be nothing underhanded for.
So I can't say, well, I didn't know you were going to vote on that day. You ever heard that? I didn't know that was going to be voted on that day. Well, let's see. Have you been to church?
We at one time, I don't know if we do now or not, but we had a limit that the trustees could operate without bringing it before the
Mhm.
congregation. Do we still have it?
We do.
And what's the limit now?
500. Anything up to $500, the trustees can act on without church board approval. Over 500, they bring it to the board, and then the board makes the determination from that whether or not it needs to come to the full church.
Well, it's got to be discussed, explained, debated,
Right, and
not debated in a bad way, but debated as to the
right, yeah, and information will be put out, but the key is it has to be announced from the pulpit at least 2 weeks prior to the time of the vote being taken. So let's say, for example, that we decide to build this building. It's gone through, the trustees looked at it, the church board approves it, and so we decide we need to have a church vote on it. Let's see, today is the 23rd, so it could not happen before February the 6th. The vote would have to be after February the 6th, because we have to announce it from the pulpit at least 2 Sunday mornings. Now, the discipline is not real clear on that. And the reason for that is because much of, a lot of that was based on churches not necessarily having service on Sunday morning. Maybe it's Sunday night, or some churches only met at certain times. But 2 weeks from the pulpit, a minimum of 2 weeks. And it's
It also be because the preachers used to, they could preach at a church on 2
mm-hmm.
Sundays out of the month, every Sunday.
Yeah, there were a lot of reasons for that, but the primary reason is to give the church membership adequate time to learn of the vote and to plan to be at the church for that vote. You said so that nothing underhanded is done, and that's true, but I think I think it's better to state that this way everything is done above board and everybody is clear on what's being done, what the purpose is, and we're not trying to slip something by anybody. In fact, and not just for trustees, this is true for any decision of the church, any major decision that's done, even the elections, our delegate elections, church elections, anything that's done like that has a major impact on the church must be announced a minimum of 2 weeks from the pulpit, to give everybody ample time to make plans for that. Additionally, the trustees also have the authority to buy and sell church property as needed. Now, it still has to have final approval of the church, but they have that authority.
And aren't they also legally responsible?
That depends on the laws of the state or the area that you're in. Technically, the church is legally responsible, not the trustees. But in some areas, the individuals would be responsible when they make that decision. It just depends on how the laws are written in that area.
The trustees would be the go-to.
Mm-hmm. The trustees, say for example that you're selling property, the trustees would be the ones who sign that, or a trustee. Give you an example. This is on the conference level, on the annual conference level. I'm one of the conference trustees, and a couple of years ago we sold the church property in McGee, and it was agreed to by the conference, but as the conference trustee, I was the one that went to the bank and met with the lawyer there to sign the papers, and talk about nervous, but and then to be handed that check for, I don't remember how much money it was now, but to get the check for it, I'm getting this thing gone real quick. So I got that to Mr. Quimby as quickly as I could, but that's the role of the trustee. They have that responsibility to maintain that. Stewards. What's the primary responsibility of the stewards? Budget? Mm.
Stewards, they're, the financial side, take care of that.
So they provide an annual budget, oversight of finances. What else? And what else? That's what I stepped back for. That's what the discipline says. I'd have to go back to 1828 and ask those guys why they thought it was good for the stewards to do that. That's just a responsibility that they give to the stewards. What else? We've already been talking about it some. That comes under the finances. That comes under the finances. What else? I do like that, though.
That's something that should be added to.
Yeah, we ought to do that, yeah. What else? Elections. The stewards are responsible for overseeing elections. Yeah. All right. Treasurer. That one's real difficult, isn't it?
Give an accounting for everything.
Each church shall elect a treasurer who shall have charge of the funds of the church and who by virtue of his or her office shall be a member of the official board. That's all that the discipline says about treasurer. That's it. All in a nutshell. Secretary. The secretary shall keep a list of the officials of the church and minutes of all business meetings and may assist the pastor with the records of the church.
Did we have anyone that's designated secretary?
We combine treasurer and secretary and into one person, one role, and that's legal, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the discipline designates a separate title or position.
Congregation, it would be more appropriate to have two separate
Yes,
committees or
two separate persons. Yes, and in a larger context, there also would be. It also is appropriate to have assistants to each treasurer and or secretary.
Now, the main ones are going to be, you can appoint an assistant,
Yeah, the board could appoint them, and designate who would be their assistants. They would not have the full authority of the,
Right, they wouldn't have a vote.
right. Mhm. Sunday school superintendent. Let me go ahead and put this one up with it too, because actually, when you look in the discipline, it has the Sunday school board, and Sunday school superintendent is one of the other officers. So who comprises the Sunday school board? School board shall consist of the officers and teachers of the Sunday school, and pastor because of his role and position, whatever, is also an ex officio member. What does that mean? Ex officio? You ever heard that? It's by virtue of office. Don't necessarily have a vote. You're not necessarily a voting member, but you are there to give input and have oversight. Unfortunately, sometimes yes. And then there are other positions as well, such as youth leaders, presidents of the WMS, Brotherhood, Deaconess Circle, et cetera, so on and so forth. There's other things. And I'll get to that in a minute. All right, so this is a very broad question, but how does the church carry on its business? We just went over that list of church officers. Those church officers make up the official board. And they are the ones who they hold regular meetings. We hold them monthly, and they are responsible for the administrative operations or oversight of the church. And so the church board holds that responsibility then. There's a lot more that goes into it. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. It does not say that they can. It does not say that they cannot.
But according to the type of government church
Mm-hmm.
has, it's assumed.
Yeah, it is. Again, our purpose is to operate in an open environment. That is, that we're not trying to do anything that we're trying to cover up or hide from anybody. The exception to that, and there is an exception to that, and the exception would be when something of a personal or private matter is being dealt with. Same thing with the school board, for example. When the school board has a meeting, there are times that they'll go into executive session. And the reason that they do that is because they're discussing private matters that don't need to be made public. And so there may be times where the church board is meeting to deal with something that is more personal in nature, and in that case, it would not be an open meeting. But an announcement would be made as to the decision of the board. But because of the personal nature of the subject, then it would not be an open meeting. But the majority of the business that we deal with is open. Now, we're a little bit more relaxed in that we'll let anybody come. We'll even let them speak. Technically, they would not be permitted to speak, and they don't have a vote. but that doesn't mean that they can't come in to listen and participate in the meetings. I think it's important that we do that, and it's good for folks to have that opportunity. But as far as voting members, it is the official, the elected officers of the church are the members of the church board. And they're the ones that are designated by virtue of their position and their role in the church. Some of the other duties of the official board not only is administrative oversight of the church, but one of the other responsibilities is that they're also authorized to receive candidates for the ministry and or for a deaconess. Some of these responsibilities used to fall under the quarterly conference. Remember when we had a quarterly conference? The quarterly conference, there were two committees that the quarterly conference would elect. And do you remember what those were? There were two committees that the quarterly conference would elect each year. The examining committee was one, and the advisory committee was the other. The church board also has the authority to elect these two committees.
We don't have anyone as such on those boards now, but if the occasion rose where we need somebody,
Then the church board would, well, they would have two options. The church board would either elect, let's say, for example, that we had someone that wanted to enter the ministry and we needed to examine them. The church board then would have two options. They would either elect an examining committee, or the church board would function as the examining committee. Our rule of thumb pretty much has been that the church board is the advisory committee and the examining committee, and it's legal to do so. So if a person comes and makes application for ministry, what do we do? How do we go about dealing with that?
isn't there a meeting where the admissions of this person is discussed?
Mm-hmm.
Why, when, and all that? Who does that?
The examining committee or the board, yeah. What else?
We got one answer, you got
Before that, there are, I believe it's 5 questions in the discipline that the candidate must be asked. And those questions are specified in the discipline. And you would go through and ask them that question, and when the committee or the board is satisfied with their testimony, satisfied with the answers to those questions, and satisfied with their testimony as to their calling, then the board or the committee would write a letter of recommendation. Actually, it would be the board. The official board would write the letter of recommendation to the annual conference, recommending this person to the Ministerial Education and Relations Committee as a ministerial candidate.
Now, when Newton was attending church here, whenever he was out here,
Mm-hmm.
to preach,
Yes.
all of this took place?
We were under the quarterly conference at that time, and yes, the examining committee would have met with Newton. I remember when Newton came to me and said that he felt called to the ministry, and we began working with him, and I'm trying to remember if that was done while I was still here or if that was after I left. I don't remember the details on that. I think some of that happened after I had left. But yes, he would have gone through the examining committee, and then the quarterly conference then, but the official board now would have made that recommendation to the annual conference, and that recommendation is renewed annually. And the ministerial candidate is granted a license to preach. And that license is renewed annually, and the church, the official board, has the authority to issue that license to preach after having examined and they're comfortable with or satisfied with the answers that the person gives.
And what about the people who have been ministers for years, are they still held to a meeting where they reaffirm what they are, what they, what they're doing, what they believe, the testimony?
Yes. Every year, and ordained ministers are amenable to the annual conference. That is, we answer to the annual conference. And so every year, we send out a letter to each member, to each ordained minister, and there's some questions that they have to answer. And those are the questions, basically. Do they still believe or still adhere to the discipline of the Methodist Protestant Church? Do they still agree with the doctrine of the Methodist Protestant Church? There's several questions that we have to answer. And we sign that form and we send that into the Ministerial Education and Relations Committee at each conference to basically to confirm that. And so, yes, that is something that we haven't always done that. We started that, I don't remember, 8 or 10 years ago now, I guess. But yes, that is done. Okay. Who owns the church property? Kind of comes back to your question earlier. But the property is titled under the local church. And per the discipline, the property is deeded to the local church, and the trustees have the responsibility for maintaining the property, as we discussed earlier, but it comes under the annual conference. So let's go back to McGee. I talked about it earlier. In the event that a church closes its doors, what happens with the property? Let's say that the church is declared extinct by the conference. That's what happened to the Antioch Church in McGee. They didn't have sufficient members. We tried to make it work. We sent somebody over, but they weren't able to maintain it. And so finally, we had to declare the church extinct. When that happens, the property comes under the annual conference trustees. And so that's what happened in McGee. We took ownership of that property, and we did what we needed to do in that situation, was to sell the property. And that money then...
Our church, what's the legal ownership here?
The Forest Grove owns it, but if Forest Grove were to close for whatever reason, if we closed our doors, then the property would revert to the annual conference. But that's one reason we need to keep our doors open.
I'll have to check into that and see if Grandpa put any specifications in there that you have to take. Because there's not a lot of them left yet.
Well, and there are some instances where that did happen. Hickory Grove is one of the examples. That property was it was deeded by I want to say it was a company that owned the property and deeded it to the church, and if it ceased to be a Methodist Protestant church, then it would revert to this company. But this company was no longer in existence, and it was a interesting situation. And there are cases where that's. They may have to. There are circumstances where that has been the case. Yes. What about if a church wants to withdraw from the conference? There is a process, and it's very definitely laid out in the discipline of each step that has to be followed. And those steps have to be followed precisely according to the discipline. And then if those steps are all followed, then the church makes that appeal to the conference, and the annual conference has the final decision on that. There have been cases where the conference accepted what the churches did, and we've had that just in recent history. Kosciuszko did that, Royal Chapel, and there's some others. But then there are also situations where it was not, and a church trial is held, and nobody wins in a church trial. But everything is laid out specifically in the discipline and how that's to be followed. And that pretty much covers the local church. So next time we'll talk about the annual conference. Any questions? I was told I kept this too long last week, so I was trying to shorten that this week. Mm-hmm. Right. We haven't done it recently. And in fact, that's where some of this material comes from, is the membership class. But
I know whenever I was growing up, we went to Forest Road, Forest was in the road. And Red Zone was getting the van. And I think he hung out, so you looked at the church anyway. According to family law. But I didn't really, I wasn't taught a lot.
mm-hmm. Historically, we have not done a good job of that. I mean, that's probably been one of our, I guess, downfalls.
Do you think that might be part of the reason for some people leaving the denomination?
I think that may be one of the reasons. I don't think it's a major reason. But it is certainly a reason. I mean, if we don't teach our children, that's one of the reasons the Board of Christian Education is working to revamp the catechism, and we're trying to make it a little bit more user friendly. COVID kind of got in the way of that, where we're trying to get back to that to get it completed. And that's one of the roles of the catechism, is that to help teach our young people what we believe. And incorporated into that is also why it's important to be a member of the church. That's all taken into that, into account on that. And it's designed for, I guess 8 to 12 years old, 8 to 15, somewhere in that ballpark is what it's designed for. But it's applicable to any age, once they're old enough to understand.
We prefer for the adults to keep sitting on it too, to
Mhm.
remind themselves, and I'm sure a lot of us adults would say, "Well, I keep them up there."
Mm-hmm.
So you learned it years ago, but I forgot.
That's true. And once we get it all together, that's my intent, is for us to go through it as an entire group. Whether we do it all together here and I teach it, or we have it in our separate classes and the teachers go over it as well. The material is going to be laid out. There will be a teacher's guide as well as a student book. And the teacher's guide will have the additional information, scripture references, doctrinal statements, whatever's needed to help them understand and explain what each step is.
Do we have a target date?
Not right now.
Will you ever have to?
That's what I'm saying. Our intent was to have it ready this past year, and COVID kind of disrupted our plans. And so we're in the process now of trying to get some of these things back on track and get them. And that's one of the things. The quizzing program was one of the things that we had hoped to release last year. And there are a couple other projects that we have. And it's just, we've had a time getting folks to be able to meet and to work on these things. And so we're trying to lay out a plan where we can do more of this virtually, remotely, and working together, collaborate together, instead of coming to a meeting, sitting down and doing it. Do it electronically, basically. And I think we can do that, and we can accomplish it that way. But we just have to get the groundwork laid out so that we can get to that point. But these are things that we need. We as a denomination, we need these desperately. And so we're trying to get that accomplished. The Holiness Summit was one of the other things that we do, and that's
When was the segregation thing relieved out of this? How did that read? Can't remember that, but I remember reading it. And then in the history, in some areas of the country, there was a lot of black people in Methodist Protestant. Am I not right there?
there is I think it's in Texas. There is a Methodist Protestant denomination. I think it's called the African Methodist Protestant Church, that would have come as a result of that. It's been a long time ago. I don't remember. That came out a long time ago. I think before my time. Mm-hmm. No, it hadn't been there in the last 40 years. So. All right, if all hearts and minds are free, let's stand. And Keith, would you dismiss us in prayer, please?